Welcome to the Always Becoming podcast with Dr. Lynn Santiago. Dr. Lynn and her guests explore two questions: who am I? And are we always becoming? We all have a becoming story. Be inspired by the personal becoming stories told by guests who share the risks and challenges, the successes and the letdowns, the joys and the heartaches they experience while on their own becoming journey. Here's your host, Dr. Lynn Santiago.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. And thank you to any new listeners. I am so happy that you're here. This is a great interview with a very courageous woman named Leslie Vaughn. Now, Leslie was 20 years old when she got into a horrific auto accident. Her friend and herself were partying. Her friend was driving. Apparently she fell asleep behind the wheel, went through a red light, and really in an instant, Leslie's life was changed. She had a head trauma and spinal cord injury that left her paralyzed from the waist down. In this interview, Leslie shares some of those details, like what those first days and weeks following the accident were like for her. I think that many of us think about like what that must be like. And we certainly hope that nothing like that happens to us. But you're going to learn something listening to Leslie. Her becoming story is one of many, many chapters. And she shares with us those periods in her life, kind of spanning from being that young 20-year-old with life just starting out through the next 24 years, learning how to cope, adjust, and thrive with the disability. Leslie lived through many traumas and setbacks, yet she never gave up on the dream of becoming a mental health counselor. She's still on that path, having recently become a licensed professional counselor associate in Texas. Leslie holds a certificate in trauma as well as many specialized trainings in addiction, personality disorders, and neuropsychology. She is the current president of the Dallas Metro Counseling Association. So, without further ado, hi, Leslie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here today, taking the time to be able to share with us your becoming story.
Absolutely. Anytime. It's wonderful to be here.
Awesome. So I always ask every guest the same question. I like to just kind of kick it off with the same question, which is, what do you think? Are we always becoming?
Absolutely. I think we're always evolving and learning and growing all the time. Every day you are shaped by new experiences every single day, no matter how small, because every little small decision leads to the bigger decisions, I think.
Okay. So part of what you're saying is like decisions is a big thing that keeps us kind of going and growing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there anything, I know some of your history just because I've gotten some information and I know there's a lot of things. And the reason why I really wanted to have you on the show is because I believe that you have a powerful, inspirational becoming story. And, we all have becoming stories and they're all inspirational because we are like heroes in our own book, right? And we have our chapters, but sometimes some people have experiences or chapters in their life that are so powerful and meaningful, so life-altering, life-changing, that it demonstrates something to others that others need to hear to give them hope, or to be able to say, hey, if you could do it, I could do it. Right?
Oh, I hope so. And I hope by sharing my story wherever I can, whenever I can, that does give hope, because I'm just one person. Anyone can do what I have done and what I continue to do, because my life lessons are not done by a long shot, because I've thought that a few times and I'm like, and still going through more things. Where my story kind of starts is in 1997, I was involved in a car collision that nearly ended my life. In fact, what happened was my driver, she was drunk, and I was 20 years old, thought nothing of it.
Happens to everybody else.
I know 50-year-olds that get into cars with drunk people all the time, but particularly at that age, you think, oh, I have it all down. I'm 20 years old. I'm old, I'm getting up there. And I look back at that 24 years later and go, oh, God, I'm such a baby. I knew nothing. What happened was she was drunk and she fell asleep and she ran through a red light. Oh. We were into one of those Honda CRXs. I don't know if you remember those, but there was like a 2-door coupe that 2-door coupe that was very, very unsafe. Like a tin can, and a Ford Ranger broadsided exactly where I was sitting.
Oh, wow.
It, when that car impacted us, it hit exactly where I was sitting. My seat was tilted back like I was sleeping. It was 3 a.m. We were headed back to my apartment. And when that Ford Ranger, right when it collided, my head hit the side of, not the window itself, but the back part of the window, like the part of the, interior of the car itself.
Wow.
So my head hit the ad. It impacted right away, cracked the right side of my skull. It the impact of that imploded the other side of my skull. So all the bones in my skull were broken.
Oh my gosh.
But that's actually a good thing because it allowed my brain to swell without killing it. Because a lot of times people die from the second part of the brain injury because your brain swells like any part of your body.
Okay.
So yeah.
So they gave it space to become you get inflammation. I guess it's like that swelling.
And they also, at the hospital, they also put a shunt in my head to monitor the brain pressure and the extra fluids that collect in the brain, killing even more brain cells. So I do believe those two things saved my brain.
Right.
Which I'll circle back to that later because we reverberated off the truck and then we hit the light pole in the median.
Wow.
And I was thrown violently forward and my seat belt was holding me back. Now, had I not been wearing my seatbelt, I would have gone through the windshield and died instantly.
Yeah.
But because I was held back, the two opposing forces of being thrown violently forward, but being held back, caused my spine and my spinal cord to stretch out over the seatbelt and slam back. So I'm injured pretty high up mid-chest on down. I have what they call an incomplete injury, which means I still have some feelings below my line of lesion. I have neuropathy around the line of lesion. Sometimes the nerves shoot off because the nerve signals are getting the wrong information all the time because there's that blockage. Sometimes I'll get shooting pains down my legs and from time to time.
So you're still experiencing on an everyday basis. I want to, kind of reel you back to that period of time and to those days or those first days of what was going on. I mean, this is just an unbelievable, trauma, an event that obviously it affected you, affected your family, right? It affected a lot of people in their own ways.
Ripple effect.
Yes, absolutely. Anything that comes up for you that's important that you think would be important to share in that occurred in those first few days?
Well, the first few days they said I was going to die. They weren't giving my family a lot of hope. They came in and told my parents 2 weeks later because I was in a coma for 2 weeks. They came in, told my parents that they should start looking for long-term nursing home care because I was going to regain consciousness. And even if I did regain consciousness, I would probably need help. I'd be in a persistent vegetative state. And here I am 24 years later. I hold a master's degree. I hold extra schooling in Florida because I moved there briefly towards a clinical mental health counseling degree. So almost 2 master's degrees. And now just a couple weeks ago, the state of Texas granted me a licensed professional counselor associates.
So that is a major, major, I mean, like, accomplishment. It's hard enough to do the work to go through a master's degree, a graduate program, to become anything really, to become, and you're on your becoming journey, and to become a counselor and a therapist, and all of the hoops people don't realize.
They do not, is not for the faint of heart. I told my supervisor that.
Right. They don't realize how many hoops we have to go through over a course of many, many years before we could actually be even, having our own practice, right? So when did you decide, well, so you did not stay in the coma?
No, I cleared the, I forgot to mention that. When they came in to tell my parents that, the very next day, I'm not even exaggerating, I cleared. I don't remember that first week, but I cleared.
Do you remember? So you don't remember when you were in the coma, you don't remember anything from that, or remember any hearing or any sensations or anything?
There is one story that sticks with me, and that's my cousin and my sister were talking because they had to shave part of my head to put the shunt in. And they said, oh, Leslie's going to be so angry about that when she wakes up, because her hair, because I had really long hair at that time.
Yeah, and you're 20 years old. It's like such a part of your identity, right?
Yep. Yes. And, my sisters and my cousin, they're girls. We understand all that. And when I cleared, one of the first things when they took off their restraints, because they didn't want me pulling, because a lot of times when your brain is injured, you don't want things on you. I kept taking off the hospital gown too. That's another story. One of the first things I did was reach for my head, and I think I heard them. I grabbed for my sister's hand at one point when she called me her little sister. So I was there when I was in the trauma tub. They called in my parents because I was teetering between life and death.
Okay, so I want to ask you two things, because you're saying things that people probably don't know what it means. I don't even know what it means. So you refer to when I cleared.
That means when I woke up.
Okay. See, it's like, well, okay, cleared what?
Oh, sorry.
Right?
I'm so used to medical terms because I've been in the hospital in and out.
I know. So. Yeah. So I'm going to stop you and kind of let you know and say, okay, let's define that. and trauma tub. I mean,
that's when they were cleaning all the blood off of me without getting too graphic.
Is it a tub?
And they wanted my parents to come in and see me before something were to happen to me. And I started reaching out and getting agitated when I heard my mother's voice, and they had to get them out of the room because of that. Because my mother and I's connection was so deep. And I'll go into that a little bit later because that was a trauma I suffered too, losing her. Yeah, because they had to keep me still, and I was too agitated. I was trying to get up. I was trying to reach her. But I was in the coma at that time.
Okay. So you're responsive, and you may have been hearing and responding to what you're hearing, but you don't remember any of it, or you don't, it was in and out of your awareness or consciousness as things were happening.
And to my knowledge, most people don't know that, but they always say, play music.
Right.
Talk to them. And I encourage everyone who has a loved one in a coma to talk to them, because I know that I felt all that love. And I think that's one of the reasons why I survived, because I fought very hard. They told my parents, she's a fighter, she's coming back. But they always knew that because I've always been feisty. That helped. And that helped with my recovery and being in what I like to call a wheelchair user. I don't like the term I'm in a wheelchair because that implies a passive kind of. Yes. I'm not just in a wheelchair. I go out, I use this thing. I go out all the time. In fact, I have a new wheelchair that I got about a month ago, and I have a power assist on it now. It's a little battery thing that just helps, and it helps preserve my shoulders, because my shoulders are, because of the repetitive motion of propelling the wheelchair, they're gonna blow at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll need replacements. So they're trying to make sure that that happens still in many, many years away. They want to prevent that.
Right. So you're 20 years old. You have this horrific car accident. You have sustained brain injuries, spinal injuries. You're in a coma for 2 weeks. When you started to gain consciousness and you started to, to really be aware of your surroundings and kind of a understanding that you're in the hospital and that you're, seriously injured. And do you recall, some of those first things that you might have been thinking about your life and thinking about yourself?
At that time, I was like, and this, I'm a very emotional person, so I cry pretty easy. So pardon me if I get a little teary, because I remember thinking, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? My life's over. Why did I even wake up? One of the things that I do remember was I was in the rehab room, and I made it all the way there. And they were talking about when I live life independently. It's a very big deal between quadriplegia and paraplegia. Quadriplegia means some functioning of your hands is diminished and you need an assistant.
Okay.
So when they learned that I was only paraplegic, my mom was like, "Oh, good news." But I hope she has the brain, because I was very capable, very academically with it. I was sharp. And I remember thinking, they were, telling me in the future when I lived alone, I thought, I'm never moving out of my parents' house. This is way too scary. Thanks to their support and my mom, she was always preparing me. She's like, I'm not always going to be here. So she let me go through those hard times, or it would have been easier for her to just grab my foot and tie my shoe for me. But I had to learn it. I had to relearn how to get in this world that is not built for disabled people. It's just not. He was a wheelchair user. And just a few months later, I would become a paraplegic. It was just weird, because like that whole day, I was really appreciating my legs. Oh, and it was almost like fate that something were to happen. It was almost like I knew. Yeah. But I'm glad I had that day of appreciating, because I didn't know.
You didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Couldn't imagine anything happening for that to happen. But
I don't think anybody, of course, nobody.
No, you don't imagine
have this. Yeah. And if you ask anybody, well, what do you think you would do if this happened? People, I think most of the answers would be, I just don't know how I would cope with that. I don't think I could manage. I don't think I could go through it. I can't imagine that,
a lot of people have said that to me. People have said to my face, if I were you, I would kill myself. That's not helpful.
No.
Because I've actually have a very nice life. Sure, I've gone through terrible traumatic times, but I'm still here. I'm still a part of society. Right. Still worthwhile. I get what they mean.
But did you think that yourself, in the beginning, when you were trying to process everything that was happening and all that was going to be it meant for your life and for your future, a future that you didn't know anything about, or you had already had plans and you're thinking, well, there those go, in those earlier days, or earlier weeks, earlier months? I guess I'm assuming that you didn't come out of this, come out of the coma and go, yes, I'm gonna, I'm strong, I'm gonna get through this, I can cope with this, I can change my life to adapt to this. I'm assuming that you didn't.
No.
And so that's why I ask you, when that was happening to you, did you think how am I going to live like this? I don't want to live like this.
Oh, I had so much anxiety. Plus my brain was healing from a pretty bad injury.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that played into it too.
Mm-hmm.
Was it registering? I don't think it registered for a while.
Yeah.
This was, I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, when do I get out of this? When do I get out of the wheelchair?
Yeah. It's like that denial,
not,
right? I would
not
imagine.
how
Yeah.
not how it works.
Yeah.
So the one thing that did help me is, plus my mom didn't let me sit and wallow. I mean, she allowed me to have space to have my feelings. She never told me this is wrong, because she told me later, I don't know how to handle it, so how could I tell you? I forgot what I was going to say for a second. I went back to school 6 months. I went that spring semester, Collin County Community College.
Wow.
And started studying back. One of my first courses was psychology. I've always had a very, very deep interest in psychology. My mom and I, for as long as I could remember, we would have talks, and psychological talks, like why people do what they do and what are behind people's motivations. So I've always been exposed to that part. In fact, when I was 18, when I was first in community college, psychologist was what I wanted to be. But you have to have a PhD, and I wasn't quite in that headspace to think that far ahead. And so I ended up dropping out 2 semesters into community college. But
you knew that you had that interest.
I can't remember all of it now, but I think I was just too focused on social activities.
You're 18 years old.
Well, plus in high school, I wasn't very popular, and I didn't go out very much. So once I got into the college scene, it was like a whole new slate. And I was like, I was making all these friends. I'm like, I didn't have all this in high school. So I was thinking I was making up for something too. Just where I was developmentally.
How long did you live at home with your parents before you were able to move out on your own?
3 years.
Okay.
I actually started transferring. Sorry, didn't start transferring. I transferred to UNT and got an apartment off campus. And continued and got my bachelor's in journalism advertising. And I've been driving independently for over 20 years. I had to, readjust my entire life around the disability. And it took a few years. It took a year to get my car outfitted, because it was outfitted through the state, through the Texas Rehabilitation Commission, which is not even called that anymore. It's called DARS. But I remember that whole year I couldn't drive, and that was wow. I hadn't thought about this stuff in a long time. You caught me. And positioning my body in different ways that I wasn't used to, like even brushing my teeth, I have to lean up against the counter because I can only balance for so long without either putting my arm down to balance my upper body or transferring into a totally different chair, which I do a lot.
I get asked that because it just, again, I'm making another assumption, and I always, say my assumption's taking us off the wrong, down the wrong path. But I'm thinking about the whole necessity to learn everything, or at least almost everything differently, to do it all differently, and how hard or challenging that is, while also trying to live life, like go to school, learn, live on your own, all of these other things that you would do if you hadn't had the accident.
But I couldn't, when I was paralyzed, I'd have to even if I slept in, I still had to have all this extra time to get dressed and to do my daily activities in the restroom, from showering. Because that's a whole new ball game. It's a whole new world. It's like I became a different person.
Mm-hmm.
Just even in my physicality, the way I thought about things, the way I had to think about my health.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way, I don't know how too graphic I can get into this, but going to the bathroom's a little bit different because I have to use special supplies in order to do my thing.
When you talk about having to learn everything and do it all different, and every little thing that we take for granted, like brushing your teeth, right? And how we this is this rapid world, right? As you do as quick as you can do it in and out, right? And we got to go out the door and getting somewhere that you couldn't necessarily do that you need that time. You need to incorporate that time into your life. So it makes me think, like, how can how can you say you can't do it, whatever it is that you want to do, because you have these other obstacles in your way when you see somebody like Leslie? I mean, incredible obstacles and challenges. Were there times where you were either stagnant or stuck in your journey, your becoming journey?
Okay, I'll kind of take a couple times where I was really stuck. When my mom died, I lost my number one cheerleader, my rock.
So you moved from Texas to Florida alone, with somebody? Alone.
One of the reasons why I needed a different environment, because everywhere I looked, there she was, and it was just really hard. Another reason I moved was to see if I could do it, and I did it. I did that. I wanted to live life from a different perspective because I'd lived in Texas my whole life, and I wanted to see what it was like to live in a different state. Unfortunately, I could do all this. And my very best friend, who is like a sister to me, who's known me since before my wreck, she was my first roommate when we were 18 together. So she knew me before. She flew into Texas the weekend I was released from the hospital and took me out. She and my other roommate at the time. So that's how close we were. And so I moved over there to be closer to her and her family. And I'm really close to her kids. Her kids call me Aunt Leslie. It's really sweet. I traveled a little bit to and from, and I kind of got off track a little bit. And then I was going to move back to Dallas. So a friend of mine who I'd known for a few years flew out to help me clean up my apartment, help me get ready. He didn't have a place to stay. So I said, hey, come here, help me pack, and then we'll move back to Dallas. You can stay with me for a little bit. This guy that was just supposed to help me, he ended up being my soulmate or one of them. Because my mom was a soulmate of mine too. So, and so we were together for a year, and we were planning on moving back to Texas again after a year. Because like 2 weeks into him living here, and I knew I wasn't going to move back, he and I just got along so well. And it was just really weird. We just kind of looked at each other and went, hey, this kind of works. Let's stay with this. Let's see where this goes. And then this was in October, and by December, this is how he proposes to me. He says, we're engaged, right? And I was kind of caught off guard because I didn't think anyone would want to marry me. Because again, this is also the societal standards of being a disabled woman. You are not considered viable. One evening, we went to take a nap. He stayed outside on the couch, I was in the bedroom about 8 or 9 o'clock that night. I wake up, I come out. He's on the couch. I almost knew immediately because we had a strong connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I went over to the couch and I tried to wake him up. And I couldn't.
Mm.
I couldn't. I freaked out, called 911, got a neighbor to try to do CPR because I couldn't get down on the floor with him.
Mm.
Another thing with being disabled.
Right.
And I couldn't live there after that because they couldn't resuscitate him. And they said organ failure. And so, but I think it's such a precarious time too at 20 because you're just being accepted as an adult, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
You're just finding yourself, you're just getting out there, and then bam, I get paralyzed and have to move back home again.
Mm-hmm.
And from a psychological standpoint, everybody has to look down on me unless you're sitting across from me, of course. So everyone's looking down on me again, and it kind of puts you in a childlike inferior position.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I had to work through that too. I moved back to Dallas, and it took me a good long time to get back on my feet, to get clear, because trauma upon trauma. My father had died 6 months before. And then my 18-year-old cat had died in June. I don't have any children, so my cats are my children. So then my partner dies because we were planning a life together. We were married spiritually, I think. So these 3 deaths happened in a row. And then I decided to move states again, which I do not recommend. And then I get everything straightened. I pass the NCE, the final test for getting, my licensure. A few months later, COVID happens. And the world shuts down.
Right.
So then I do trainings.
Your becoming story is continuing to evolve, right? And
I just think that last part's really, really important to how I got to where I am now.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And I did a lot of healing, a big spiritual journey.
I like to ask my guests to close with a favorite quote or mantra or, saying, affirmation. What's one of yours?
My mother always told me, I am not my mistakes. I'm who I'm going to be. And I love that. I take that to heart.
Yes.
Because I've made a lot of mistakes in my past that I had to push through too. But always keep going. Always becoming.
Thank you again. This has been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I know that what you're contributing is going to be an inspiration to many people. So I thank you for that. So there you have it. Leslie's story, part of her becoming journey. She's not alone. There are over 5 million people living with paralysis in the world, and many of them depend on mobility aids, specialized equipment, and caregivers in order to have an improved quality of life. And so many people, just like Leslie, didn't let their injuries and disabilities define them. They didn't let their injuries and disabilities stop them. They may be slowed down. They may have incredibly difficult obstacles to overcome, but it did not stop them. Leslie has so much persistence, determination, and resiliency that kept her going, and she's still going. Leslie ends with wise words that her mother used to say to her. I am not my mistakes. I am who I'm going to be. Keep those words in mind as you're walking along your becoming path this week.